I'm Rob Dietz.
I'm Jason Bradford.
And I'm Asher Miller. Welcome to Crazy Town, where the most popular courses at the community college are bunker building, bullet smelting, and how to cook human meat.
Hi, this is Crazy Town producer Melody Allison. Thanks for listening. Here in Season 5, we're exploring false prophets and the dangerous messages they're so intent on spreading. If you like what you're hearing, please let some friends know about this episode or the podcast in general. Quick warning, sometimes this podcast uses swear words.
Language!
Now, on to the show.
Hey, Jason. Hey, Asher.
Hey there.
Hey.
You know, I moved to Portland, Oregon fairly recently.
I'm sorry.
Yes, we do know that.
Well, it has a really cool geography. They've got all these extinct cinder cones all dotted around the city. It's in this extinct lava field called the Boring lava field.
But it's exciting.
Yeah,
B-O-R-I-N-G?
Yeah. But
Who had a bad day when they named it?
I don't know.
Boring.
But I live near one called Mount Tabor. That's a really neat park in the city. There's another one called Powell Butte where you can go hiking in the forest and look at all the mountain ranges and stuff. But then there's one, the one that's probably closest to my house is called Kelly Butte.
I haven't heard of this one.
It is the forgotten one.
That's why I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, you sort of go over there and I don't know, it's not too pretty, but it has a really interesting history. So going way on back to 1952, just at the start of the Cold War, right?
Yeah.
Soviet Union, United States. Well, the city of Portland decided to build the Kelly Butte Civil Defense Center.
In an extinct volcano.
Yes. Yeah.
That's cool.
It's like a beginning of like a movie.
Yeah,
Or
it's like James
where
Bond movie.
I'm thinking it's where the James Bond villain would hang out or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was built in 1955-56. It cost a grand sum of $670,000.
That's cheap.
That's like at a decent house in Portland these days, right?
But that's a cheap house.
Right. But it was built to house local government in case of a nuclear attack on the city.
Smart thinking.
So,
Good thinking.
Yeah, so they put like 19,000 square feet of space in and under this butte. And it was designed to hold 250 people. So they're the emergency government after the Russians.
That's an incentive to be a
city.
Civil servant, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, jeez.
I mean,
There's perks.
forget the pensions.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny. If you look at photos of what it looked like, it's kind of like something out of the Stanley Kubrick movie, Dr. Strangelove.
Sure.
It kind of looks like that war room.
Yeah, black and white.
Yeah. So it actually got some notoriety. It became a model for other cities to follow. And the network CBS actually made a documentary, a docudrama, I guess you'd really call it, called A Day Called X.
I hope it's on YouTube because I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, you can find it. It's pretty fascinating.
This is in the 50s?
Yeah.
That? Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so 1957 that thing came out. It was actually kind of like they had to put a warning on it and say the Russians aren't really attacking us, but we're just explaining what happens
movie
if
when
they
we were
do.
kids that came out that was like something.
The day after.
The day after,
The day
yes.
after tomorrow or something like that?
No, that
was a terrible.
That's a climate change
climate
one.
movie.
Cher's talking about a nuclear Holocaust
yeah.
one.
People were fucking freaked out after that.
You just
came
added
out.
tomorrow and it means climate change.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah. You just got it.
Yeah. I've lived through two like existential threat kind of
Right.
memes.
On network television
Yes.
in the movie theater.
Yeah.
Okay, so they build this thing, right? And it's lauded as this incredible...
Lauded,
sorry.
Yeah.
It's not that loud, but...
It's pretty loud.
So they go and close it down in 1963. Just did not last
That's not very long.
all that long. No.
I thought you were going to say like 2013.
No, they actually, after they closed it, they retrofitted it into this 911 dispatch center.
Oh.
Can you imagine
And,
having to go work down in there?
Well, that was the thing.
Sucks.
People were going into this,
Oh.
under mountain building, and they were complaining of sick building syndrome.
Because the weather in Portland isn't shitty enough. Like most
No
of the
light.
year, you got to go down.
Want to be underground.
Underground.
So after they did that, 20 years after they made it a dispatch center, they permanently closed it, and it became this hot spot for vandals and drug users, kind of
Cool.
secret little hideaway. And then the city finally came in with bulldozers and just buried the thing in 2006.
Well, this kind of reminds me, this whole story of Sharon and I have a favorite, one of our favorite artists, right? Donald Fagen of Steely Dan. And
Wait, Steely Dan is not an actual person?
there's two guys from Steely Dan with a lot of session musicians. But anyhow.
You guys have lost me again.
Okay, doesn't matter.
I'm going back to my bunker.
Well, this song on Steely Dan's album.
No, on Donald
Fagen's album called New Frontier is a great one. And it's got a line, it's just a dugout that my dad built in case the Reds decide to push a button down.
Yeah, there was a craze of building bunkers.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Not huge city bunkers, although I guess they did a bunch of those, but a lot of backyard
bunkers. Little ones, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Well, that could be my backyard bunker if I go do some excavation over there.
I think it sounds like it's being used for other purposes right now.
Well, this brings us to the false prophet of the day, a man named Barrett Moore, who we might call sort of a ahead of the curve prepper.
Yeah, I was thinking we call him the patron saint of white male preppers. Is that fair?
I think that is fair. Okay. He's quite a character, and we don't want to spend a ton of time on this guy because it just ain't worth it.
Here's the relevant piece in terms of his bio. The guy's from northern Michigan, the Upper Peninsula, which, by the way, I'd love to visit someday.
I would too.
Yeah. Not the Upper Peninsula.
What? Oh, it's not in the Upper Peninsula.
Yeah, he's from northern Michigan, but just didn't quite get across whatever that would be, Lake Michigan.
Loser. Anyways, in a town called Pellston, way up between Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. And apparently Michigan's like a prepper paradise. I don't know.
I think it's one of those states that people think, oh, well, climate, I'll move there. There's lots of water.
I think a lot of people are heading that way.
Big hunting culture.
A lot of fresh water's key.
Yeah, a lot of people heading to Duluth as well.
Yeah.
And,
there's probably already a lot of bullets up there. Right?
Yeah. I think the important thing to know about this guy, really, for our purposes, is that he's got a shady sort of checkered past. He ran some businesses that were a little exploitative, you could say. He had a tendency, we could say, a penchant for exaggeration, but the guy fucking lied. He made up stuff about himself. Allegedly, in case he's listening. Because one thing we found about him, he's litigious. We've discovered this, right?
Yeah, we're not really sure about anything we're saying right now.
So according to some people, the guy was a con man, right? So he claimed that he was an intelligence officer in the U.S. Army, specializing in issues related to non-proliferation of biological weapons and weapons of mass destruction. Turned out, his military career was slightly exaggerated. Dude was in college ROTC and spent 8 years in the Army. He also claimed...
In the reserves.
Right, in the reserves.
Yes, weekend Army.
Yes. He claimed he was a spy in Australia. First of all,
yeah. How do they make Vegemite?
Right.
How do they do it?
Yeah, not an industrial spy.
What is the true lineup of surfers in the break on
Who
Bondi
put
Beach?
the shrimp on the Barbie? I really want to know.
The same guy who let the dogs out.
Does the toilet bowl really spin the other direction?
So apparently, he's hot demand as a spy there. But actually, the truth was that he was saying he was tapping into all these illegal operations. What it allegedly turns out to be is that he was actually part of an illegal car smuggling ring, got busted, and then he's turned state's evidence or whatever and became an informant instead, right?
Yeah.
As you do.
Right. I can't look. I've never been in his shoes. I can't really say, what I would do in a situation like that. The relevant piece though is he founded a company called Triple Canopy, which he started.
An arborist?
Yes, it was that. But then it made a turn when the Iraq War happened.
Oh.
And moving from trees, he went to provide mercenaries for the U.S. government.
Okay.
As you do again.
As you do. All natural leap, right? They actually took over $1 billion contract from Blackwater in 2009.
Louise.
That's when Blackwater was they were in a little bit of hot water.
At least they were named appropriately.
Well, they changed their name, Blackwater.
Yeah.
Because it was a little too on the nose there.
Triple Canopy does kind of sound like a nice, I would hire them to see what kind of diseases the forest has or something.
Right. And, this was the days where billions were sloshing around there and all these grifters and con artists were coming in. So, anyways, he got in on that act. But by the time that they took over that contract from Blackwater, he had already been kicked out of the company. He was sued for enriching himself.
Wasn't ethical enough to be on top of that company.
Yeah.
That says kind of what you need to know about.
Okay, so the background is kind of a shady character, but he's creating this persona somewhat phonily. And the thing that really we want to get into is he formed this company called Life Continuity in 2007. And he was basically providing private salvation in the face of existential threats and, jihadists and electromagnetic pulses and pandemics. And, for hundreds of $1,000s, you can pay in installments. You would get the services of Life Continuity.
After I read Dies the Fire, and I learned that EMPs could take down, airplanes, and they crash in downtown Corvallis.
Yeah.
I looked this dude up at the time.
Up.
Yeah,
I know.
I just didn't have enough money, but
No.
Installments. Get on the payment plan. Come on.
So you know how we have sponsors at the end of the show, very, very prestigious companies.
Love our sponsors.
Well, I wish I had gone after this guy when they were in business still, because this is one of their PR kind of quotes. Okay, only a fool ignores approaching threats and just hopes for the best. My concept of life continuity speaks to the wise, who appreciate that history does have a habit of repeating itself, and that cultural deviations can swell over time to impact nation states, influencing their behavior. It is critical for families to address cultural decline, to think generationally, and to plan purposefully so that loved ones and their offspring can mitigate today's risks of living in densely populated metro areas, particularly the risks associated with interruptions, large or small, of our fragile supply chains, whether by man-made or natural events.
Are you sure you didn't write that?
It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. I'm sold.
we would have come up with a better name.
Yeah.
Jason would have come up with a better name than Life Continuity.
Jason doesn't come up with...
sorry. Yeah.
He just writes copy based on what
I work with our clients.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about Barrett Moore's strategy. There's actually a very recent article, 2021, from writer Sam Biddle called The Rise and Fall of the Ultimate Doomsday Prepper. And in it, he talks about how Barrett Moore's big sell was this comprehensive package to evacuate you.
Yeah, get out of that big city.
Yeah, so you're in some kind of apocalyptic scenario, and you're a member of Life Continuity. They would transport you to a haven.
The haven.
Yeah,
I love
Quote
that.
unquote, the haven.
Yeah, and Haven was actually on Moore's property up there in Michigan, and he would hook clients by doing all this fear-mongering. I mean, you mentioned, jihad and pandemic and, magnetic pulses.
All kinds of crazy stuff. Solar flares. Don't matter.
He would do all that and really come up with, here's this huge list of things that's gonna plague humanity.
Yeah.
And if you're smart, you're gonna come in with me.
It was, I have to say, it was interesting, the whole cultural decline bit.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Like, is that coded for something? Because that's a sort of a contrast from these acute sort of crises like a pandemic or something like that.
I think it is playing into then sort of fears of like the others. In other words, you can't relate to the rest of your society anymore. Even.
Well, in fact, there's a guy who's a well-known fiction writer named Brad Thor. I actually don't even think that's his pen name. I think that's his real name, Brad Thor.
That's a nice one.
And he's written a bunch of books. They're pretty terrible, I gotta say. I read one of them. Anyways, very successful. And he got turned on to Garrett Moore. They actually became quite close. They were friends, and then they fell out later and started suing the pants off each other. But to your point, when you were just talking about Jason, like, he actually talked about what drew him into thinking about the world of like preparedness and drawn to Garrett Moore was the fact that
Barrett Moore.
Sorry, Barrett Moore. I keep saying Garrett Moore. That he was living in LA when the riots happened in 1992 and kind of scared the pants off of him, right? So now, of course, you could have a response to an event like that and think, maybe we need to address some of the like structural, deep systemic issues that lead this many people to be this angry.
Yeah,
right?
redlining, police.
Just institutional racism within the police force and, all this stuff. No, he's like, how do I protect my family and bug out?
Yeah.
Well, here's what's going to happen. Okay, you're going to get whisked to the haven, and it will support 200 people for a period of 5 years against any hazard.
What about Sharknadoes? Does it
It's
protect
covered.
against
It's on the list.
Sharknadoes?
It's on the
It's
list.
covered. And so, they're equipped to provide your needs in the event of broken supply chains. You've got the food, you got the water, all these other plenty of toilet paper, electricity, fuel, telecommunications in case there's anyone left to talk to out there.
Sure.
And they've got security personnel, from his connections to the
Supposed
the
connections.
mercenaries and stuff like that. Medical services, you got air filters and water filter. Environmental needs are cared
sold.
for. They've got entertainment, and guns.
Can we just talk for 1 second about the name The Haven? It sounds so close to heaven.
I think it's brilliant.
Also,
alliteration.
Is there a difference, really?
well, Lord of the Rings, they had the Grey Havens. That was like where the elves all went. So he's pulling from great literature. The
Yes.
Bible, Lord of the Rings. I mean,
Yes.
just drawing people
This
in.
is freaking genius.
The guy kind of, I guess, went a little crazy with some
Okay.
of his ideas. Everything you said so far, Jason,
I think it's
totally
I think
rational.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's good. But he had a few other ideas. He submitted something like 400 patent applications to go along with this life continuity scheme. Here's my favorite.
Okay.
Okay. So for people who didn't have the
Private
wherewithal,
jet,
the money to get into the Haven, you could get a tomb, basically, like this. Think of it as like your safe room in your house that
Okay.
rich people have. It's just on your roof.
Yeah.
It's like it's like a crypt.
Okay.
You could store all your survival supplies in there. It's on the top of your house.
Yeah.
If some shit goes down quickly, you just gather up the family, the kitten. Don't smush.
It's
the
like one of
cat
these bunkers,
in
but
your-
it's on the roof instead
yeah, it's
of
not
in the
even a
ground.
bunker. It's much smaller than
Okay.
that, right?
Okay.
And you
Like
all
a
pile
survival
in.
pod.
Yeah, and then you close it up. Hopefully you can open it again. I don't know, but then a helicopter will come and whisk you away.
But where you take it? You're not taking you to the Haven?
You take it straight to the graveyard and put it in a hole and then just
Maybe the
bury it over.
bulldozer.
Done. We evacuated the family.
That's the thing.
I guess maybe you've got your own little private compound in Idaho that you're getting whisked to or something. What
Well,
is this?
Think about it. If you have enough of these on enough houses, they could be like bricks. You could make a border wall out of them.
Yeah, exactly. Shh, don't tell the clients this, Rob.
Okay, so I mean, this really for Barrymore, it comes down to a money thing. I mean, like we're trying to reveal the guy's a bit of a con man. Maybe that's even putting it nicely.
And by the way, the guy's out of business, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the website doesn't exist anymore. He's been sued to high heaven, right?
Yeah.
Like
High
you got to go
Haven.
the way back machine to find any
Right.
of this stuff online.
Well, that Biddle article, he's got a pretty good way of describing it. He says Moore's company operated like an affluent-only disaster relief firm. It's like FEMA for millionaires. So the long story short is that this life continuity project, unsurprisingly, fell apart, kind of like a bunker in Portland, after about 10 years, and it just had all these impractical things going on, construction projects and then lawsuits for not following through.
Okay, well, we're picking on this poor guy.
Poor guy.
Poor guy.
But
Fucking con artist.
okay,
Allegedly.
okay. Yeah. But he's basically is representing a certain type of surviving the apocalypse, sort of the genre, and it's a sort of rugged individualism and lots of private capital, kind of a prepping 1.0 style, right? And what's interesting is that there's different niches for this, so you can market to different niches. And one of my favorite ways of getting a view into this is that show Love, Death, and Robots.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's sort of like an animated Twilight Zone or something.
Yeah, it's kind of off the wall stuff, and it's kind of a little sci-fi, but also kind of dark, in many ways. Anyway, season 3, there's these 3 robots, and they're like walking around planet Earth after the apocalypse, exploring the ruins of various bunkers, and they've got different levels of bunkers. So they show up to this like compound that looks like out of The Walking Dead, where okay, so like fences, tall fences, and razor wire and stuff, and
Right.
there's all these
Like
rednecks.
lookouts in towers and shit. Yeah.
And it's all
Yeah,
these
one of the robots is wearing a hat that says, "My guns are lubricated with liberal tears," that he picked up off of a skeleton.
Yeah, it's this right-wing compound, and they ran out of bullets and beans, and and they all died. And then the next one is they're out onto this offshore oil derrick
Yeah.
that has been tripped out like it's some resort in the Bahamas.
Where they converted it.
They converted it, and they've got an AI robot serving them drinks and stuff like that. And of course, they're all dead too. And then the last is the rocket ships to Mars. For the billionaire. So you kind of got this different level of wealth.
It's like class.
It's like class.
It's organized by class.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, I tend to side with the not wealthies, right?
Okay.
Because that's more my style. I'm not going to be on the rocket ship. I'm not going to make it into the seasteading oil derrick.
Yeah.
So I think that there is prepping that's not for the wealthy, and some of the best descriptions of that occur on one of the most popular shows that ever aired on the National Geographic channel.
That channel disappointed me, by the way.
Yeah. I thought I was going to be seeing like Sylvia Earle doing stuff about the ocean.
I remember as a kid, like getting National Geographic magazines and like all this really interesting cultural anthropology stuff, like looking at tribes in Borneo or whatever it is.
I know they could have done so much.
And well, now this is modern cultural anthropology on television.
I just quit National Geographic. It just made me sick.
We're going to dumb it down here and go to Doomsday Preppers.
God,
that was a TV show.
That was airing after Ancient Aliens.
Right in there.
Yeah.
It was on the air from 2011 to 2014. You can still catch it on National Geographic's website. I couldn't get through all of episode 1, but I watched a couple of the vignettes in there, and it's, oh my gosh. So a relative one, I went over to a relative's house once, and she said, "Oh, Rob, you do that stuff for PCI. I know the show you should watch." And then she told me Doomsday Preppers.
That's why I never tell anybody what I do.
I know. So I as I said, I watched a little bit of it. They started talking about the Yellowstone supervolcano, financial meltdown, nuclear war, solar flare,
terrifying.
AI, nanobot, Terminator, nightmare stuff, all that.
Yeah, I'm waiting.
Otherwise known as Kurzweil's wet dream.
Yeah. So they had this couple. They were shooting rifles, the .22 caliber, so not the big guns, but shooting at the walls of their house to make sure it wouldn't penetrate.
Wait, at their own house?
Yeah. They want to make sure they got enough armor on the house. So these folks were prepping for a magnetic polar shift.
That could happen.
Yeah, and they thought there would be major landmass shifts, so Texas would like float up to where Canada is. Earthquakes would knock out the
I hope nobody told them
grid.
about the Cascadia earthquake.
Yeah.
So they ended up compiling a new living arrangement in a bunch of steel shipping containers, and they had 50,000 pounds of food laid out in there. So I don't know, man. This stuff got a little wackadoodle.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Okay. Well, that's kind of pathetic compared to what the millionaires do. There's this guy named Larry Hall, and he's the owner and developer of survival condo projects. And these guys convert decommissioned
Just
underground.
think about that name for a second.
I know, it's great. I know, it's so good.
Do you really want to survive if you have to live in a condo?
It's a condo. He got great HOA rules.
Can you imagine? You can't get kicked out.
No. Okay, they convert decommissioned underground missile silos into nuclear hardened condos, and these look great. I've seen pictures; they look freaking awesome.
How do you go about buying a decommissioned missile silo?
I mean, there's these like websites for like government.
They're like on Craigslist or something.
No, the government has this stuff that they auction off, right? What's those called? Those sites where they have like government stuff that's no longer useful for the government, and they want
I
to
have
sell
no
it.
idea. That's why I'm asking the question.
I got. We'll talk about this.
All right.
Okay. 900 square foot half floor unit to these 3,600 square foot penthouse. Like, I don't know why you want to
explain the penthouse. Is that the one on the very bottom?
It should be upside down.
It's like the flip. It should be flipped,
I know.
right?
Anyway, I don't know. They got shooting ranges and hydroponic food and
all underground.
Military grade security, indoor pools, rock climbing walls, dog parks, arcade classrooms, libraries, movie theaters. High-speed elevator,
Yeah,
you got
to get somewhere quickly.
Time is the essence here. And so, since COVID-19, interest has freaking skyrocketed, and he's got actually a consultant who worked on the Biosphere 2 project, trying to learn from the mistakes that were made on that project. So, I mean, step it up, people.
We need to move our studio into a missile silo. I think that would be pretty sweet acoustics. We could improve things a lot. Okay, well, Holy cow. We've gone from the kind of low class to the middle class, or maybe middle plus, the millionaires.
Yeah.
What's next?
Well, I mean, if you're a millionaire, you got to hedge. You can't just rely on maybe a U.S. missile silo.
Right.
Maybe you ought to think about going somewhere else, just in case.
Oh, that's right. You shared that article from Molly Redden at Huffington Post called "The American Elite Are Planning Their Escape." And it starts with paying for passports.
Exactly.
That article was I highly recommend it. Basically, what you do is you pay $1 million so that your family can get a passport and become a citizen of Malta, which that's in the EU because that's a small island in the Mediterranean. So then you could kind of go with your EU passport. Yeah, live wherever you want.
Genius.
Weird, like it's catching on too. Same as you said, after the pandemic, like people are worried, and especially in America where you got this polarization, you got insurrection.
So you have people on the far right worried about, the Black Lives Matter destroying the society. You have people on the left worried that, Trump's white Christian nationalist thugs are going to take over and we're going to be in a Margaret Atwood novel. And so they all want to converge on Malta.
And you got pretty much normal people walking around seeing the shit show too. They just don't have the money to buy their way into Malta.
Right.
That's
exactly.
right. Well, we should talk about what billionaires are doing. I mean, they're also getting themselves citizenship in multiple places. New Zealand was I think particularly appealing hotspot for some of those folks, covering their butts in all kinds of ways. But I have to bring up the story that Douglas Rushkoff had shared with us. We talked about this before. Douglas wrote about this experience he had sitting down with some billionaires in a book that he wrote recently called "Survival of the Richest: Escape Fantasies of the Tech Billionaires." And in it, he just describes how he thought he was being invited to a public talk. He got really a fantastic honorarium to do this. He shows up, and instead it's just like less than a handful of billionaire dudes who are like prying him with questions.
He got some compound in Nevada.
Trying to figure out, well, how do we handle this? How do we handle that? How do I make sure that my armed guards, my security detail doesn't turn on me, when the shit goes down? It's a sign that they're desperate to try to figure out too how to hedge their bets, cover their asses. We should send them all to Kelly Butte and put them down where the Portland Center used to be. They could just have it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the ultimate, prepper plan, and that is let's get the hell off of this rock in the first place.
There's two competing visions, right?
Let's go. This is not sustainable to live on the Earth necessarily for very long. So, Elon Musk is trying to get us to Mars.
Yeah.
That should be easy. No problem.
Yeah.
Piece of cake. And then Bezos, his vision's a little different. He's like, no, let's just harvest the moon and we'll just float around in space.
O'Neill colonies.
Yeah.
Which we covered with the Stuart Brand episode.
And this is not, it's not just the stuff of Netflix dark comedy animation, right? Cartoons. This is real.
There's just gobs of resources, money going to this.
Yeah, business leaders launching stuff into space.
Yeah. Now, I will say, so if we call all that, I think you talked about it as prepping 1.0, prepper 1.0, we're talking about maybe extreme examples. I'm sure that the National Geographic show was not going for nuance and subtlety in their coverage, right? They're looking
I will give this to them. They did have kind of a, what do our actual experts think of this plan? And they would do a little critiquing.
Okay.
So there was at least leaning towards that, but it was pretty sensationalistic.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say prepping has come a long way if you want to think of it in those terms. I think pandemic has really dramatically changed a lot of the conversation around prepping. It's been, I think, primarily historically viewed as something that kind of white males are doing, survivalist, sort of off the grid, maybe associated with kind of right-wing political views.
Yeah, I mean, if you get together to talk about what kind of beans store the best, and then the next weekend you just kidnap the governor.
Right, exactly. I think, I think that does a disservice to the community of people that are involved in prepping on some level. And I also think that the prepping, quote-unquote, movement has changed a lot, particularly after the pandemic.
Oh, yeah. I think a lot of things have changed. In fact, there was a huge uptick in gardening, for example, remember during the pandemic, which is sort of a form, I guess, a form of prepping. You're trying to make sure you got basic food supply covered for your family.
I was growing toilet paper trees.
Nice.
Myself.
Yeah.
Wait, what's the difference between a tree and a toilet paper tree?
They're just very soft plant fibers. Yeah, nothing rough. Anyhow, no chafing.
Cottonwoods.
So cottonwoods. So sort of the mainstreaming, prepping 2.0 might be the mainstreaming of prepping, where kind of normies are into this now, and it's not just men, and it's so it is estimated now from FEMA that households are prepared if they can survive on their own for about 31 days. And about 10% of households might be preparing for that about now, this day and age. So that's significant. It's 10% is a lot of households.
Yeah.
And there's a group called ReadyWise, and they said that their market has shifted from about 95% men to more than 50% women.
That's pretty.
Yeah.
95% men.
Yeah, and these are known in industry now as guardian moms, and they're really concerned about a reliable food supply for their kids. So they've got the minivans, and the doors automatically open from either side.
You could swivel the gun pretty easily.
Yeah.
From one side to the other.
No,
Right, you've got
we're on to Prepper 2.0,
sorry.
not 1.0. You're regressing.
I was just picturing this jacked out, minivan. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I know, you got bulletproof doors.
I saw that van in the movie Tango and Cash with Kurt Russell and Sly Stallone. Yeah.
Did you?
Oh, God.
Okay, so we're into 2.0, which means this is a studyable thing.
Right.
There's this professor at the University College Dublin named Bradley Garrett, and he spent 3 years doing ethnographies of preppers.
Nice.
So, it's like instead of going off into some distant land and studying he's just studying preppers in his countryside. And he actually wrote that most of the preppers he studied were not preparing for the doomsday. They're just everyday people who anticipate and try to adapt for conditions that, that might not go as expected. And so he was trying to draw this distinction between the Cold War era survivalists, my Kelly Butte bunker guys, in the missile silos, with today's preppers who are not so much into the politics and partisan ideology, but they're more focused on, okay, how do I just be prepared for what's coming? Now, the punchline of this is that this researcher, Bradley Garrett,
very nice academic.
He actually, after doing this study, became a big-time prepper himself and started living off-grid.
Okay.
So I don't know. That might say something about what we ought to be doing.
Well, he drank the Kool-Aid, which will survive a long time in storage. That's for sure. Yeah.
How would you like to hang out with Asher, Rob, and Jason? Well, your chance is coming up at the 4th annual Crazy Town Hall. The Town Hall is our most fun event of the year, where you can ask questions, play games, get insider information on the podcast, and share plenty of laughs. It's a special online event for the most dedicated crazy townies out there, and it's coming up on June 6th, 2023 from 10 to 11:15 a.m. U.S. Pacific Time. To get an invite, make a donation of any size. Go to postcarbon.org/supportcrazytown. When you make a donation, we'll email you an exclusive link to join the Crazy Town Hall. If we get enough donations, maybe we can finally hire some decent hosts. Join us at the Crazy Town Hall on June 6th, 2023. Again, to get your invitation, go to postcarbon.org/supportcrazytown.
Well, this is a really easy species to key out and describe. We're talking about Homo caverno, otherwise known as bunker builder. And basically, this species sees existential threats all over the place and also sees that there's a corrupt and inept government that really can't protect patriotic citizens. So families need to look to private enterprise to find a way to survive through the future shit show we're going to have. With enough upfront money and logistics, life underground will be all A-okay. Right?
Yeah, if you got a pool down there, it should be fine.
Yeah.
Live like a gopher.
Yeah.
Well, I think that Barrett Moore, he's got a quote that you just know he's this species.
He's perfect.
Right? Let me lay it on you.
All right.
He says, we may well face a day of reckoning where a choice between buying beans or bullets is starkly set before us. Neither FEMA, nor the military, nor the police could be relied on in a true national crisis, leaving only the private sector to save you and your children from jihadists or germs. Compared to the hellacious suffering to come after the end of civilization, what self-respecting businessman could say any sum of money wasn't worth the peace of mind?
Ching ching.
So, guys, I have to say, I'm finding it interesting that we picked Barrett Moore as a false prophet, and this whole topic of prepping, for the season. Because when you were doing the typology, Jason, I was like, yeah, I kind of see myself related to the species. Quite a bit.
Yeah,
You've got some
share
risk aversion running through your
you
veins.
share a common ancestor.
I was thinking a lot about some of the areas of overlap. Now, we talk about this with quite a number of our false prophets,
Yes.
right? Which is that there's a lot of what they say, or a certain proportion of what they say and believe that we're like nodding along to, and then all of a sudden it's like, it just veers off, into some stupid direction or dark direction. And thinking about some of the overlaps, I'm gonna read another quote from Moore that was in St. Bill's article, which I think, was something that we would probably agree with, right? So here's something that Moore said, quote, "Today is becoming apparent that this post-World War II period of global prosperity was just an aberration in time. Our economic stability is fading, having been undermined by poor leadership, erroneous policy, ideological self-centeredness, and unprecedented levels of debt that render the future much more ominous than the recent past. We have conspicuously lived beyond our means for too long." I mean, that's...
Duh.
Yeah.
That's something we
I'm
would
with
say.
you, buddy.
So therefore, put a coffin on the roof of your house and fly off to his haven.
When the shit hits the fan, we'll come and get you. Right?
Well, I mean, again, it's sort of like it's a relief to get away from these eco-modernists and these neoliberals full on, like, in some ways, it's nice to have this change in the season where that bullshit is kind of dismissed and these guys tell it straight. So sometimes you're like, yeah, thank God I'm not listening to Steven Pinker again.
Right. Tell us straight
Stuart
on
Brand.
some level.
Right.
But with a prescription that maybe we wouldn't quite agree with, right?
So, I mean, this is what we always go over. Like, if you are worried and you see this type of reality, you agree with that paragraph, then obviously you might be drawn, well, what does this person who I agree with think we should do? And so I think there's a lot of susceptibility to this, I can look on with, admiration, those missile silos that have been bunkered out. I mean, my God.
I'm scared to walk around the property now and see what's out there.
Well, there's
Careful where you walk. All of a sudden, there's a big hole.
Oh, there's a manhole cover. Don't worry. Okay? It's dark, though.
It's a long drop.
The first step is a doozy.
Have you put in the high-speed elevator yet?
No, I can't afford that. Anyway, you look throughout history, there's been a lot of these sort of shocks that drive this survival instinct and these prepping responses. So we kind of mentioned, the nuclear bunkers in the 50s and 60s. And of course, in the 70s, there were the oil shocks and the back to the land movement.
Yeah.
We have been very, closely tied to the peak oil community in the 2000s.
Yeah, do you remember Matt Savinar? Does this name ring a bell to you, Jason?
I totally remember.
I
met him, actually.
Oh, really?
Yes.
This is before or after he turned to astrology?
This was before astrology, but okay. I kind of knew.
You laugh, Rob.
You guys knew all the best
But I was worried about him even then. I was like, oh, no.
So for listeners who don't know who Matt Savinar is or was, he had a website called Life After the Oil Crash, and it might have been the most popular sort of peak oil website out there, kind of in the earlier part of the first half of the 2000s, you could say.
2004 or whatever.
And a lot of the reaction for people at that time was anticipating a very acute collapse of the system due to hitting a peak in global crude oil production. And, the dude was, frankly, he was selling on his website, survival kits and shit.
Yes.
Probably raking it in. I don't know what the turn to astrology was, but fascinating.
Well, if we go back to what you were talking about in that paragraph of Moore's that you read, Asher, where he's like, we've been living beyond our means and the wrong policies. Well, you guys know I've been pitching steady state economics, sort of a Herman Daly vision of what we should do. And almost right after I started working at PCI, I got this awesome email from one of our esteemed audience members who basically, the premise of his email was, are you crazy? Like, we need growth so we can have jobs. We need to keep this game going. But he had an agreement with with the premise of that paragraph, that we're living beyond our means,
Right.
and we're consuming too much. And he finished that email. He said, the only solution we have for the economy and energy and all that is more of the same. We got to burn more fossil fuels, create more growth, and kick the can for as long as possible, because when growth stops, we all starve. And then, this is the best part, he said, the can kicking's about to end. Perhaps you, meaning me, you, Rob, can print this email out and frame it and refer to it when you're down to your last can of beans.
Did you? Did you frame it?
I did not.
You remember it.
I did
It was
not.
memorable.
It was very memorable. I mean, I saved the text because I was like, it made me laugh. I mean,
Right.
but there's like an overlap in our audience, right? With maybe even Prepper 1.0. I don't know, but people who know what's going on and.
And they're saying there's nothing we're going to do about it. We're just going to keep kicking cans until it just falls apart.
Well, I would say that's a particular response to it, which is what he's basically saying is, can we please keep kicking the can down the road until I die, right? Like, let somebody else deal with the consequences later. But I think, the truth is, it is understandable. You talked about susceptibility, Jason, but I think it is understandable when you actually see the vulnerability that our current modern industrial society has, the fact that we don't really have leadership that recognizes it is doing anything to do a course correction whatsoever.
Right.
It's understandable that people will be like, fuck, I better prepare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and more recently, of course, the 2008-2009 financial collapse with the Occupy movement and the pandemic and supply chain disruptions and political mayhem we have now. I can see why there's just more and more people attracted to like prepping in some way. And so I think this is an important topic.
Yeah, there was another thing that I noticed too, especially when I started looking at the Doomsday Prepper episode and some of the other material, is that you kind of realize that our culture in the United States has this prevalence of hero stories and rugged individualism. It's built into our the founding of the nation mythology.
National DNA.
Yeah, it's built into every freaking superhero movie that we see now. It's like, I am going to survive the coming apocalypse through my grit and my brilliant preparation. And I just don't see that story as playing out too well.
I think that there are questions about this approach, which we're going to get more into in terms of if this individualistic response or this even like neoliberal free market sort of response, let's hire people to bail us out, isn't going to work. That having a community focused or more community oriented response is a better way to go. That said, there is an argument still for individual, I think, prepping on some level. And I thought a reporter named J. Oliver Conroy in The Guardian made, I think, an important point about this when he was writing about how the pandemic revealed some truths to us, right? Which is that we can only get through disasters collectively. Hopefully that was a lesson to people, through the pandemic. And I remember in particular in the UK, I was really moved by how communities like in the UK and other places in Europe were really, really coming out like a certain time of night and clapping or somehow honoring the medical care people, the first responders and all that. So people really saw that need for collective support, right? And how dependent they were on it. But Conroy talks about how collective action also requires, quote unquote, some level of individual responsibility and preparedness too, at least for those with the ability and the means. You can't aid your elderly, your immunocompromised, or poor neighbors if you haven't taken the bare minimum of preparations. There's a reason that airplane safety demonstrations warn passengers to put on their own air masks before assisting others. So while we might say this is a very limited Prepper 1.0 or even 2.0 approach is maybe too limited, you do have to take care of this.
Yeah. So basically we're saying there's a practicality to being prepared, yourself and your family.
Yeah.
But also, you should include thinking beyond yourself and the immediate family. And there's actually an interesting story of a religious backlash during the Kennedy era and his administration's push. This was before the Cuban Missile Crisis, but
this is like back to the bunker days, almost like where we started this thing today.
Yes, he was basically there was a resistance to this, to saying like this is individualism and this isn't thinking.
It's immoral.
Yeah.
Right. there are a lot of religious leaders across, all kinds of Christian denominations, Jews and others, who spoke out about this as being immoral, to basically say, I'm going to create a bunker for my own family, and screw everybody else.
And also there's a moral hazard. It's like, oh, okay, if I go down in this cave with enough supplies, and I'll open it up someday, and the world will be fine, which is just ridiculous. Like it doesn't do any good. You're going to survive another few weeks.
But in the meantime, there's great beer down there.
I know.
It's some good Donald Fagen music that we can listen to.
Maybe some Funyuns and Cheetos.
Yeah. I also want to I want to point out that there's something about that we have to look at critically when it comes to thinking about the community scale response as well, right? Because you can see, and I think you're already seeing this on some level, sort of a green fortress mentality to take place where more affluent, well-off, maybe more prescient communities, whether it's people moving in, like we were talking about, wealthier class of people who are worried and trying to prep, moving to places that might be more climate resilient, for example, or whatever, have more resources, or otherwise being in a situation where the community comes together to support each other, but at the cost of others, right? There's still like an inside-outside sort of dynamic that happens, and there's a moral question to that. There's also, I would say, a real sustainability,
practical,
question about doing that. And you could even argue that this is happening at the largest scales of all, because on some level, look at colonialism. Colonialism, in a sense, is extracting resources from other places, the labor of others and natural resources to improve your lot where you are. And you could easily see, and we're already seeing a rush to sort of do this in response to particularly the climate crisis, or maybe, energy transition shocks, where you've got wealthy nations basically robbing poorer nations of their natural resources. So I think we have to be really careful, even if we say, oh, well, we came together as a community. Who's that on the back of?
Right.
Okay, folks, it's time to rate this guy, Barrett Moore, on our highly scientific and well-calibrated insufferability index. All right, so again, personality, ideas, his intentions. High score's bad, low score's good. Who wants to go first?
Can I go first?
All right, go ahead.
Okay, because I was studying this guy.
All right.
He's getting a 3 on intentions. I think he's a con man, pretty damn malevolent.
Okay.
I think he's getting a 3, 2.5 maybe on personality.
Okay, or 5.5.
Yeah, could be fun to have a beer with, but come on. He's trying to sell me something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And pretty screwy on the ideas. 7.5.
Okay.
Strong 7.5.
Okay. Sharon, you want to go?
I'm going to go a little lower.
So you want to hang with this guy then?
I did say I want to hang with him.
You want to spend the rest of eternity in a missile silo.
That's exactly right.
You got to be on his good side.
Look, guys, I have a little invested in him. You're ruining this for me. I'm going to go probably 6.5, 7, depending upon the day.
Yeah,
you
got to cranky today, so I'm going to say 7.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. I think, his ideas aren't complete wackadoodlery. So I think I give him like a 2 on that. Seems like kind of a jerk, but I'll give him a 2 on that. He's not the worst of the worst. And malevolence, power hungry, I'm gonna give him a 7.
All right.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Every decision I've ever made in my entire life has been wrong. My life is the complete opposite of everything I want it to be.
If every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right.
Okay, so when I think about doing the opposite here, it's actually not totally the opposite. It's not like don't prep, right?
Right.
It's more like going from prepping 1.0, prepping 2.0 to maybe prepping 3.0.
And I'm so sorry we're doing this because I hate this stuff. I hate when there's 1.0. I hate this
3.21.
I thought you were going to say 5.0. I had no idea 3 was going to be the next one.
Well, if I was following Kurzweil's logic, it's exponential growth. It's prepping 26.75 million. No, it's kinder, gentler, wiser, more sustainable, more just prepping, right? So, which means you do start with prepping at home. It's not throwing that out the window.
So get yourself a shovel, start digging a bunker
in your house. Yeah, underneath
I think
your floor.
bunkers are good. You put your cabbage in there.
You only say that because you have a bunker.
Your sweet potatoes.
Exactly.
No, so it's having a plan in event of emergency. It's always been recommended, and FEMA, Red Cross, other agencies have got lots of resources for individuals and families to use. I would say 2 good starting resources for those who haven't done any of this work yet and are looking for some sort of basic first steps. You could check out the Red Cross's preparedness checklist and FEMA's 12 ways to prepare. We'll have links in the show notes for those. I could tell you that I was a little lazy about this myself, and COVID, definitely woke me up. So I've got my checklist of things that, we kind of restock every once in a while, make sure it's still good.
Nice.
Yeah, unlimited Funyuns at the Miller household.
Yeah. I'm going to get raided.
But of course, part of prepping 3.0 is stepping up for more community cohesion as well. And you've already kind of mentioned that a little bit, Asher, and it's a recurring theme here in Crazy Town. One of the recent articles on resilience.org is by a friend of ours, Tom Prue. The article is called Idiots Are Us, but he was talking about how our aim is to support a movement of democracy preppers. So these are people who want to stockpile social and community capital rather than just dried beans and ammunition.
In addition to dried beans and ammunition.
Right.
Okay.
I don't think that's what Tom said.
Okay.
Well, you're not going to deliberate as a community very well if you're out of dried beans and ammunition.
Exactly.
Maybe don't bring the ammunition to the democratic
You don't start
deliberations.
You don't start with that, okay? Show up with the beans first.
Right.
But I think it's important that you get to
nice casserole, right?
Yeah.
Maybe some corn chips to dip in there.
Careful, don't dip into that one. It's got bullets in it.
Well, I do think it's important, get to know your neighbors before the disaster, support one another in normal ways of life. And, we're all susceptible to the triggers of fear for the collapse, but it's probably better to be prepared ahead of time and work together some way in community. That's probably the best defense against your fears and just in case, right?
Yeah, well, it's kind of cool. I have something like that, a community thing right in my neighborhood. There's a neighbor of mine who's a volunteer on something called a Portland Neighborhood Emergency Team. And they have these in each neighborhood around the city, and you basically have volunteers who are trained to provide disaster assistance in the place where they live. And, this is very much a departure from where this started with the bunker thing out at Kelly Butte, right? I mean, you're training up people there to figure out, how do I help if something happens? So, like, in our region, earthquake is a big possibility. And so these folks are trying to figure out, what would happen if there was an earthquake? How would I help my neighbors? And I get emails about their meetings. The last one was on ham radio operation and how do you transfer large amounts of data with a ham radio?
Can you explain how that works? I mean, is it because the ham is salted? It's got like electrode in one end and it powers the radio?
Yes, you've got it exactly. You are prepared, Jason.
I was going to ask, do you think that that the city of Portland would be more devastated, like the people would be more devastated if there was an earthquake or if they suddenly ran out of coffee? Which one?
Well, I'm hoping the two don't happen in conjunction.
Oh, yeah, that would be...
If they run out of coffee, they're just going to jump in the river off the bridge, There's like 6 bridges, so,
Not after the earthquake.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. This is totally logical that an agnostic, non-religious Jew like myself would want to talk about what the Mormons do.
Oh, yes.
But I'm going to talk about the Mormon way, right? Which is, folks might know this already, that Mormons do have an expectation. Part of their tradition, their religion is that you're supposed to have a certain amount of supply of food for your family. But the Mormon way is actually more than that, right? And there's a pretty sophisticated community network that plans for both individuals and the collective well-being The church operates like a really massive network of grain silos and food depots. People undergoing hardship receive food and household goods for free or in exchange for volunteer service. The system is vertically integrated with food supplied by church-owned farms. All Mormons, as I mentioned, are encouraged to maintain emergency stockpiles in their own homes, not just for themselves, but to assist their neighbors if a natural disaster or something else strikes. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, they would make it available to non-Mormons. That's one question I have, but definitely looking at it from a community approach, right?
I think that whole thing's super impressive, but I also look at it and they've got these Costco scale warehouses for everything. I mean, their farms are not, like Amish farms. These are like massive industrial farms. So I'm kind of impressed that they're actually thinking about this, but I also wonder, how useful is this in a true disaster?
Well, or how many of these farms are in the Great Salt Lake area where they're going through massive drought? And
I think they own farms all over, actually.
Probably.
It's fascinating.
But it's interesting. They're actually becoming a little less preppy over time. That's not the right word of the right vocabulary of preppy.
Hi, I'm Blair the Mormon.
Well, so the requirements for how much food they need to store, it's gone from 2 years down to 1 year, and now it's down to 3 months.
Oh my God, they're slacking.
Yeah, it's not. We're not talking a huge. Long
so they're becoming
here.
Slack Mormons. Sorry, that was a bad joke. Sorry.
Just talk about something else now, okay?
Okay. So anyway, what I think's happening now is you're starting to get all these 21st century back to the landers, and I think this is important because. And I'm going to call this prepping 3.5, okay?
Oh, jeez.
Okay.
Just a guy who does not like labeling these things.
I'm leaning in.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a big difference between being reasonably prepared for some kind of hiccup in high energy modernity and actually being ready for powering down as sort of the system is forced into some kind of simplification. And so, you can have this backpacker mentality, or you've got your MRE type supplies.
Yeah, you got a water filter.
Yeah, you got a
you
sleeping
could
bag.
drink raw sewage once you run it through that.
You can live in a pup tent in your backyard if you have to, whatever. But we're social creatures. We can't prep alone. That's part of 3.0. We get that. But I think it goes deeper. And that if you actually develop a livelihood with all the community associations that livelihood requires, that isn't so dependent on the trappings of globalization, these complex supply chains, these big financial systems, and all these unfathomable technologies that underpin everything, including the Mormon farming, that's what I mean by 3.5.
Okay.
Was that inspirational?
Yes, it was. And it makes me realize your missile silos do not fit your definition.
That's true.
Of 3.5.
Yes.
There's also, you call these neo-agrarian movements, Jason, but there's a lot of effort underway, different models and experiments with community ownership of land that has worked for procuring, sustenance for the community. Examples: Living Energy Farm. There's the Wales One Planet Development Program, which is really trying to support that kind of an effort. For some reason, the Welsh are doing some pretty interesting things on a lot of levels. And lots of, I would say, community scale models across the United States. Ones that are also focused quite a bit on BIPOC communities and other communities that have been disadvantaged historically. Rushkoff, we talked about him before. Mm-hmm. He does mention that a guy who was trying to raise funds from rich folks to set up organic farms to support rural subsistence, both for their families and local communities. But unfortunately, at the time of publication of the book, they couldn't get capital.
I know it's ironic.
These wealthy people.
Well, it's not. It may be ironic, but it's not surprising.
Oh, you're right.
Because
it's not surprising.
The people who have the money, they're not going in for this high-level 3.5 style prepping, right?
Right.
They are just relying on, we're going to have a storehouse of goods somewhere, we're going to have all these supplies, guns, whatever, put up, maybe even rocket ships, and we're going to maintain our comfortable modern lives. What happens when those storehouses run out?
You know what I think we should do, honestly? I think we should promote these. We were talking earlier about these like kind of crypts that people can put on their roofs. House. Let's sell those to the billionaire types, right? And then we'll just let them know. Oh, there's an emergency.
Pretty sure Barrett Moore already did that.
Go climb in there, guys.
You do not have the new plan. Well, I got my plan.
What's
I'm going to the framer's shop so I can get that email framed up and
Yeah.
read it over and over when the last can of beans is all I got.
Well, I do have plenty of something in my bunker, right? Can anyone guess what that is?
It's not bullets. It's not beans.
It's wine.
Wine.
And so I think we need to go down there right now. I'm thirsty.
Let's do it.
It's only 9:30 a.m.
Thanks for listening. If you've made it this far, then maybe you actually like the show. If that's true, then there's one very simple thing you can do to help us out. Share the podcast, or even just this episode. Think of 3 people you know who would get a kick out of Crazy Town. Use your podcast app to share it, or send a text, or go way old school and tell them face to face. Let's build a Crazy Town community so that one day we might be able to escape it. 3 friends, please share.
Let's face it, most folks can't afford to buy a compound in New Zealand or a decked out, defunct missile silo in North Dakota. So what is a regular Joe to do when facing the upcoming collapse of society and resulting mayhem and hunger? The answer is obvious. Become a Mormon. In one frenetic weekend, the crew from Mormon Makeover will transform your home and turn your family into Mormons, complete with fresh undergarments. Imagine the feeling of knowing you have a pantry stocked with a year of food and are members of a tight-knit community that owns nearly 2 million acres of North American farmland. Mormon Makeover. Relax, you're now a Mormon.
Crazy Town. Da, 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 Crazy Town.